Okay, let's take a look at these two beautiful superbikes from the 1980s era. Both are 1983. You've got on the left the KZ1000R, and on the right the CB1100F. I'm just going to sort of do a little walk around though. So these bikes are both original, or darn close to it. The Kawasaki even has the original Kirker 4-into-1 exhaust that came with the bike from the factory. Got the thing running. It had been in a friend of a friend's garage for 25 years, so I was lucky enough to stumble upon it. Cleaned it up, got it working, everything's going great with it. The Honda's the newest acquisition. I just picked this up. I stumbled upon it. I was kind of keeping an eye out for one because I had a 82 900F back when I bought it new in 84, and loved that bike. Put tons of miles on it, went everywhere on it, and so I knew the 1100 was even more desirable, so I found one. So this one's also quite original, got the original exhaust, and the bike runs great. It needs some love. I just got it, so but I've been riding it, and it pulls really well. I'm going to do the valve adjustments, sync the carbs, do all the usual stuff. I'm going to work on the brakes first because they're pretty bad. I suspect the pistons are pretty frozen up. But no, this thing is awesome. I just put these tires on it, the BT46s. So just as a walk around, what was unique about these bikes, the Kawasaki was based on the J model, the KZ1000J. So there's nothing really special about it except that it, is mechanically, except that it was painted in the Kawasaki racing green. There's the character of the two. That's what we'll talk about when I take it for a ride. Couldn't be more different. You can see the cockpit of the Honda is very refined. Not that the Kawasaki isn't. It's got a nice instrument cluster as well. But it's just the characteristic is very Honda, which, if you don't know what I mean, is that it's very refined and sort of tame. The opposite is the Kawasaki, which is kind of rambunctious. The bike sounds quite throaty, partly because the previous owner had drilled holes in the end caps, and that's what gives it a little bit more sound. But you can also kind of hear the idle is a little lumpy, but that's all going to get taken care of. You can hear it burble a little bit. That's just tuning the carburetors. But out on the road, it really runs strong, so nice and clean. All right, now the KZ1000. The choke is down here. This bike's a little bit warmer. It should start right up as well. Hear the bark of the motor. The choke in. Not quite warmed up yet. That 4-into-1 really gives it quite a raucous sort of sound, which is really the character of this motorcycle. It's definitely wants to party. It's still a little cold. This thing runs clean. It's just not. It just sounds like a hot rod. Alright, I think it's about time we take them for a ride. It's typical Honda. I used to own a 900F, which is why I was attracted to getting an 1100. And why I liked it so much is it's just, they're very refined. Even for 1983, this thing is, the inline 4 16 valve motor is really smooth and really powerful. This thing is more powerful than the Eddie Lawson replica I have, or superbike replica 1983 KZ1000. So this thing has got more grunt to it. It's got another 100 cc's, but it seems to even be beyond that. It sounds pretty good, but I'm glad he didn't get rid of the stock exhaust, because it's really rare. So these bikes have become quite sought after. Not quite as sought after as the KZ1000R, but still, it's a beautiful bike. Yeah, see, the brakes are really wooden. I kind of checked the brakes out real briefly when I had the front wheel off, and the pistons look pretty rough, so I suspect they're kind of stuck in the calipers. The brakes work, but they're, actually they were known to be pretty good in their day, and I remember the 900 having pretty good brakes, so we'll work on those and get them up to snuff. The bike is, it actually feels lighter than its 580 pounds. See, the bike pulls really great. I'm gonna have to adjust the clutch some, because boy, the throw is just right at the very end of the lever travel. See, it's got really nice torque. And the other thing is it's comfortable. So the Honda, compared to the Kawasaki, I'll call it the Eddie Lawson replica, even though it's technically the superbike replica. This is just much more refined. It's the Kawasaki is kind of angry almost, and that's what Kawasaki's were sort of known for, is just more raw feeling to it. The Kawasaki, I took it on the racetrack, and it actually did pretty well. I have some really sticky radial rubber on that bike. These are bias ply. They feel good. They feel really good. But this, like I say, the seat's really comfy, cushy. It's got higher handlebars. They're actually adjustable. You can adjust the angle this way, and I believe also the whole thing going that way. I haven't messed with that yet. But for a 39-year-old motorcycle, this is 2022. This is pretty amazing. Just how tight it is. So I got this, again, partly as a winter project. Living in New England, the winters are long, so I'll be able to get this thing looking, riding really good. As far as the looks, like the paint, it cost about $2,000 to get the original paint quality, because it's got this candy apple. It's called Maui Red, and it's like a two-part paint process, like a candy apple. So it's not an easy color to replicate. So if I'm going to do that, let's go down here. If I'm going to get that done right, it costs a pretty good chunk of change. And so part of me just wants it to be a runner, and it looks good from 10 feet away, even with the fade. And I might just keep it that way. some patina. Yeah, it's pretty good. Again, the Kawasaki, a lot of people ask me to compare the two, both same year, Kawasaki and Honda. You know, what they feel like, and the Kawasaki just feels much more, I don't know, urgent. The handling is sharper. It's certainly not as cushy. The suspension on this bike is pretty soft, very comfortable ride, whereas the Kawasaki is, seems more purposeful. This thing is just a blast to ride. At some point, I probably have to decide whether to keep one or the other. I'm kind of leaning toward this just because I love the way it looks, and it goes back to my youth, having the 900. Everything about this bike is better. It's got the 18-inch front wheel instead of the 19-inch that the 900 had. It's got cast wheels instead of those Comstar wheels, which were sort of assembled, and those wheels contributed to the bike being a bit wallowy. Not even a bit wallowy, very wallowy. Yeah, I mean, the suspension's tired. You know, I'll go through that too. I'll rebuild the forks. I'll put certainly new bushings in the forks, seals. And I may, while I'm in there, go ahead and put a Race Tech cartridge emulator in there, because that little upgrade does a world of good for these old damper rod forks. Yeah, it definitely feels different handling. It's not, say, it's quite as precise. The KZ1000 is pretty sharp, more precise. This thing is good. You can put it right online. Is that the suspension's kind of moves around a little bit. Yeah, but it's stable. I mean, that's one thing that this bike is known for. It's heavy, 580 pounds, and it's got a long wheelbase, so it's definitely, the geometry helps it with the stability, and I can feel that. But it's not bad with usually the trade-off is not being so nimble. It moves fine. See, what I'm feeling though is once it gets in the corner, it wallows a bit, and that's what the 900 used to do. It pulls out of corners really good. I'm at 4,000 RPM, so I'm barely even in where the real meat of the power band is. Again, these big motors can really sort of keep them in the lower RPMs. You get all the power you need. The forks on this bike, like a lot in that era, have air assist. So there's a little air valve on the side here that you put is from 0 to, I think they say, 8 pounds. And it's basically a kind of a preload way to set your preload. But it's never, they stopped doing it because it just creates more stiction. The other thing this bike has is they call it track, T-R-A-K, G-R-A-C. It's the anti-dive system that a lot of the manufacturers used in the early, up to even the late 80s. Basically, when you use the brakes, the caliper sort of rotates on some pivot arms, and that shuts a valve in the lower part of the forks, and then it arrests the compression damping so that you don't get the dive. I mean, how does it work? I haven't really tested it. Let's sort of look at it, feel a little bit about. Yeah, see, it dives, but it sort of stops. It dives for maybe 1.5 inches. See, and then it stays pretty well trimmed, so it works. The other thing about this bike is that it was kind of the last of the big superbikes. Now, 84, 85, Kawasaki came up had the 900 Ninja, which still was an inline four, but it was water cooled, whereas this is air cooled. So this is sort of really is a threshold between the early superbikes, air cooled inline four superbikes, and the beginning of like the water cooled or liquid cooled bikes that could outperform these, the air cooled bikes. Like the same year that this bike came out was the Interceptor, the V45 Interceptor, the 750. Anyhow, the Interceptor was miles ahead of this bike, and it came out the same year. So that showed the future. This was definitely the end of an era through the 70s, Japanese superbike era. So we just got off the Honda, and I gave a little bit of my thoughts on that. But let's compare the Kawasaki offering for 1983 and to the Honda. Now, Kawasaki also had the GPZ1100, and that would probably have been the better match comparison to the Honda 1100F. But this is a pretty good comparison. People are wondering about what the two bikes are like. When I was riding the 1100, I mentioned how cushy it is, how soft and comfortable, and that's really what the first thing that comes to mind when you get on the Kawasaki is that it's much more urgent, like snappy. The power, probably a little less power with the Kawasaki than the Honda. It's given up 100 cc's, and they both weigh about the same. The Kawasaki was, they did sort of market it as being a little less weighty, but it's still like 550 pounds or so. The Honda, I believe, is 580. So it's a reduction. But again, the first impression is just how the Kawasaki is just more taut. The suspension is much more rigid, and it makes for a much more precise feel to the bike, even though it's a little bit sort of harder to turn left and right. One difference is I'll take a left here, is this bike has a 19-inch front wheel, and the 1100 moved from the 19-inch to the 18-inch front wheel. This bike sits lower than the original cutout seat, which I have, and the original stock Honda seat couldn't be more different. This Kawasaki seat is more like if you knew what a Corbin seat is like. It's more firm. Even the covering is a little more, more harder, I guess. You get much more feedback through your butt with this seat than you do with the Honda. But the bike, like I say, it sits much lower. My knees are much more bent. The foot peg position is probably about the same underneath my butt between the Honda and the Kawasaki. The Kawasaki sounds angrier because Kawasaki's typically had that growl to them. This has the original Kirker exhaust, so the sound is more urgent and angrier, sort of growly. The seating position, like I say, it's lower. It doesn't feel necessarily sportier, but because you're lower in the seat and your knees are bent, it does have a sense of being a little sportier. The handlebar bend is a little lower on this bike and swept back slightly. I guess it's just lower. And again, it just sort of gives you this feel about it being more ready for action. This bike typically has felt more precise in getting into the corners. Like I say, it's a little bit slower to change direction. Not a lot. I mean, this thing feels pretty darn good. This bike I've had on the racetrack, and it actually did great. The character of this bike is again more racy, sportier, and that power band hit is noticeable. Again, I mean, the Kawasaki it lunges out of corners, and And the Honda does too, but it just doesn't really feel like it's got the snap to it. So this bike, I also noticed that when you're going through the gears at 3,500 RPM, it almost hits a power band. It's like a two-stroke. Whereas the Honda is smooth all the way through the rev range. Like the transmission, they're both really good. I feel like I can do clutchless upshifts on this bike, whereas I don't do it very often, but I just did one just then, and it just snaps up there real easy, real good. This bike has 18,000 miles on it. The Honda has 39,000. This is all stock suspension. I did change the fork oil, and of course the brake fluid and all that in this bike, and so everything feels better. The rear shocks on this, again, they're the original shocks, but they're performing as I expect they did when they were new, in that they're a lot more taut, not harsh. I guess so. The Honda, you go over a whole bunch of bumps, it's like not a big deal. This thing here jumps you out of the seat. So in a nutshell, I just kind of feel a little bit like the Kawasaki is more exciting, which is not big news for people who've been following or know about superbikes of the era and manufacturers. The Hondas are always, and they still are, the more refined, more gentlemanly choice. Kawasaki's have always been the hooligan bikes, and I can see why they felt that way. Boy, this thing just feels so strong. So I feel like I go faster on this bike just because the bike taunts me. It really just wants to go faster. The Honda could kind of care less. It'll go fast if you want it to. But, I just came down this road on the 1100, and it was good. It was fun. But this thing, again, is just the feedback you get with the Kawasaki is quite a bit greater than with the Honda. Now again, this has a little bit of a jump, but it doesn't feel like it has a flat spot, though. That's the beauty of it. It's just power, 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 more power. And both bikes are really great about just cruising. Like right now, what am I at? 3,000 RPM. Probably in fifth gear, fifth gear. That's all it has. Both of them are only 5-speed. And I can just cruise along. It's got plenty of torque just to pull out. So one other difference that as far as comfort goes between the two bikes, is the Kawasaki, this bike here, has a lot more handlebar vibration and practically zero foot peg vibration. The Honda is the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. So handlebars, I feel no vibration, like a little bit, but I really feel the buzz in the foot pegs. Very, very interesting. So it's hard to know if I were to pick one bike over the other to keep. Boy, I really want to say I want the Honda, but this thing is just more fun. Just is more exciting, raw. The Honda, like I say, it's just very friendly, and it's really beautiful. And the red and white is just striking. But of course, this green, you can't. The classic Kawasaki green, you cannot deny. It turns a lot of heads. They both do for different reasons. Again, it's just something about the power delivery of the Kawasaki that gives you a feeling of it just being much more snappy. The response is much more immediate. The cool factor, I guess you have to give the nod to the Kawasaki, just because it's so rare. It's the Eddie Lawson, heritage, the early superbike heritage, can't be denied. The Honda is just, gosh, I mean, it certainly has its coolness, but it's much more like a boutique type motorcycle. I guess I think of it that way. And it's funny because they're both so similar in so many ways. It's only when you ride them back to back that you go, oh yeah, you see these differences. So I'm glad I was able to ride them back to back and share my thoughts with you. These are the bikes that I choose when I want to just go for a ride. I've got other motorcycles, but these are the ones I look at in the garage and really feel something. I certainly love my Tiger 800. It's a very capable bike, and I love the way it looks. But these things here are just something else. They're something special. So, thanks for tuning in. If you want to see what this bike was like on the racetrack, I've got that video on the channel. Also, I have another earlier video with this bike that you might want to check out. All right, catch you later. Ken Condon, riding in the zone.